Every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, April 12th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live, not steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, but rather the other heartland of America. That, of course, is the exhibition hall at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. The 2019 Mass Torts Conference. On the program today, Republican senators can't work out disaster aid for Puerto Rico, so they go on vacation. Trump orphans WikiLeaks. Former Obama White House counsel indicted in charges from the Mueller fake witch hunt. Ohio bans abortion after 6 weeks in a bid to get SCOTUS to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Republicans are not on the Kane train, but they do confirm a former oil lobbyist to Secretary of Interior. All this and more on today's program. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, apologize for the late start today. We're in Las Vegas, Nevada, and just trying to gather our wits.
Nobody lost their cool, though, so that was what mattered.
Losing at the blackjack table. All this and more. Let's turn down the music, if we could. Thank you. There we go. Okay, all right, let's start right off. We will get to some of the news of the day, and I'll have a couple of interviews today. But with me now is Daniel Nye. Daniel, you're an attorney from?
Papantonio.
Pensacola,
Florida.
Okay, and so tell us this case. It's
Valsartan.
Okay.
It's really an interesting project because it's a lot different than a lot of the drugs we've handled in the past, which are name brand drugs, and really you start looking into corporate America greed and those kinds of things where they're putting profit over safety. This all originates with, it's a generic medication, and what's happened for generics.
What does it set up to treat?
It treats high blood pressure. So the idea is, one of the backstories behind this is, most of our generics we've put in the hands of India and China, and with very few safeguards. And that's what we're seeing happening here in Valsartan. We've allowed 1.5 million to 2 million users a year to be taking a contaminated Valsartan pill that causes cancer.
Okay, wait a second. All right, let's back up here. So Valsartan is a generic drug, and you say it's blood pressure?
To treat high blood pressure.
Okay, and it's manufactured. Who are the American? They're manufacturing it in where?
So here's how it works.
Okay.
Whenever you have generic medications, the vast majority of them, they have the active ingredient, which is what makes the medication actually work, is manufactured overseas. That's manufactured in India. It's manufactured in China. The vast majority of active ingredients are manufactured overseas. And the reason for that is because they can do it a lot cheaper, and in large part because they have fewer safeguards.
All right. Well, so what? So how many different, let's say, U.S. companies are? How does that get contracted out? Who is making Valsartan? Let's start at the top of it and follow the chain of title, if you will.
Absolutely. So here's how it works. So we've got our active ingredient, and the main bad actor would be this Zhejiang Weihai facility manufacturing plant in China. They're making the active ingredient.
Who's hiring them to do that?
So then what they do is they send that pill, that contaminated, not pill, but contaminated active ingredient into the U.S., and they have a U.S. subsidiary who puts it into pill form. Or there's some other people like Teva, U.S., or Actavis, and some Torin is another one of them. So some of these large companies that are U.S. manufacturers in the U.S., they take the active ingredient and put it in pill form. And so the idea, in terms of generics, we've recognized that this is a problem, that we're turning over the vast majority of our drugs to China and India.
Let me before we get there, I want to just understand. So we have a Chinese manufacturer who is basically making this active ingredient on spec.
That's right.
And then they're coming into the marketplace in the U.S. and they're saying, here, buy our active ingredient. And really, any number of different pill manufacturers at that point can say, okay, we'll take your active ingredient. They could theoretically have, I'm not in the valsartan business, I'm in the making generic pill business.
Exactly.
And so I've got a bunch of yeast and whey or whatever it is that I put into to make a pill.
Yes.
And I shop around for whatever the cheapest active ingredient is and say, okay, this guy's got valsartan and there's some space in the market. So I'm just going to buy from them.
You've got it.
Put it into a pill form and then sell it. Okay, so that's the way it works?
That's completely it. And so it's all about pricing. Whoever can manufacture that active ingredient for the cheapest will oftentimes win the bidding war for the U.S. manufacturers.
And so is there any, who oversees that marketplace of, because I presume if I'm making an active ingredient in the United States, I'm getting inspected by the FDA. Somebody must come by my factory occasionally, right?
That's right. But the problem is we don't have the adequate number of inspectors to inspect those plants. The FDA has been saying that for some time.
The plants in this country?
In China.
In China.
That's right, where the active ingredient and the wrongdoing is occurring, the contamination is occurring. So the other thing that we've done is we put safeguards to say we recognize we can't fully ensure its safety. So we say, U.S. manufacturers, you have to do the testing to ensure its safety.
Because there's such a long and robust record of companies policing themselves in these instances.
That's exactly
and it works out so well. Okay. So, all right. So the FDA doesn't have the resources to send inspectors to these plants to make sure that is there any testing of the active ingredients? At any point of the process, and how does that relate to? Are there any active ingredients that are made in the United States?
Well, there are. But in terms of valsartan, and a lot of times for generics, there's just very few of it made in the United States.
So to the extent that there's any active ingredients made in the United States, is there a process to sort of test that, hey, this is actually, my understanding is Las Vegas has marijuana dispensaries.
Right.
And if I go there and they put on the envelope that it has X amount of THC, presumably, there's somebody who comes in occasionally and tests whether that's actually the case.
That's
right?
correct. Yep.
Do we have anything analogous for prescription drugs in this country?
We do. There's all sorts of testing that can be done, and the U.S. manufacturers will still do some random testing of these products. They did it here with valsartan. They found signals of the contamination. They sent it back to the Chinese manufacturing plant, and you know what they did? They sent it to their local lab, and they said, we don't understand the reason for having these high testing errors, so we think it's just an error, and they repackaged it and sent it right back into the U.S.
So with that sort of broad understanding, so what happened, this valsartan that was sold to, I guess, presumably multiple generic pill-making companies in the U.S.? Right. And all of those generic pill-making companies presumably have the responsibility to make sure that what they're actually buying is this active ingredient as opposed to, say, lead or whatever
Exactly.
it is.
Yes.
And what does it turn out was in the valsartan?
It's called NDMA or NDEA, which are nitrosamines that are very genotoxic and cause cancer.
And how did they get into this valsartan?
So basically, when you're combining certain chemicals, and this Chinese manufacturing plant realized they could save money by changing the patent on how they combine chemicals, if they had done the simple chemistry up front, I think they would have realized that there was a real high possibility of getting this NDMA and NDEA. but they didn't do the chemistry up front. That's the problem.
So they simply changed the molecular structure of the active ingredient, and because it was a cheaper way of making it.
That's right. Well, the molecular structure is still the same tetrazole ring, but the byproduct is different because of how they combine the chemicals. And that's the byproduct is NDMA and NDEA.
And so this is in the valsartan. And so how many years has this been the case?
Well, they changed the process in 2012. And we know that active ingredient has been flowing into the U.S. at least by the end of 2014 until present. I mean, they recalled it in July of 2018.
So, and how did the recall come about?
It was a local manufacturer. I don't even think it was a U.S. manufacturer. It was a different country who realized that there was contamination. They realized this NDMA, and they called Zhejiang Weihai out, and then the EMA picked up on it, and they said, you need to recall this. And then it took the FDA multiple weeks after that to finally actually issue the recalls here in the U.S.
What's the EMA?
The European Medical Agency.
So, if I understand you correctly, there was a Chinese generic pill manufacturer, analogous to an American generic pill manufacturer, who just has all the sort of the byproducts and the stuff that it presumably makes it stick and cling into a pill, or
right.
Coated to slide down your throat or whatever it is, and they're the ones who found out that the manufacturer of the active ingredient had tainted stuff. None of the American corporations who make this, they did not find this out.
Well, they may have found a signal of it, and it wasn't a Chinese company. I think it was a European country who figured it out and then flagged their European authority.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then they started to figure it out from there, and the recall started rolling thereafter.
That doesn't speak very well for the our pill manufacturers versus the European ones.
It does not.
Okay, so that gets flagged in Europe, and the FDA gets wind of it. And so what do? They start to check these pills that are coming in.
Yeah, now they've realized this is a problem, so they're vigorously checking and testing, all different batches to try to figure out if there's any NDMA or NDEA contamination. So it's no longer just the Chinese manufacturing plant that they're checking. They're checking all the facilities that are manufacturing active ingredient for valsartan and other sartans as well.
Okay, and so who is your plaintiffs and who are the defendants in this situation?
Well, my plaintiffs are people who have been diagnosed with stomach cancer, liver cancer, colorectal cancer, or kidney cancer, because the science shows that at these high levels of NDMA contamination, it causes those cancers. So those are the people that I represent. It's unfortunate because there are many clients that I have that I'm completely convinced that it's that NDMA in their pill that caused their cancer.
And because they've been taking this for 3-4 years in some
3-4
cases.
years, that's right.
Who are the defendants at this point? I mean, do you sue the U.S. manufacturers of the generic pill? Do you have the ability to sue the Chinese manufacturer of the actual valsartan? I mean, who gets sued here?
The people who make the active ingredient are sued, so the Chinese company is sued. But then all the U.S. manufacturers are also sued, so we sue them. And then you even have people who repackage what the U.S. manufacturer put together, and they stick their own label on it. Well, they're also ensuring the adequacy of their drug when they do so. So those are people who also get sued. And then the other thing you got to consider is the person who actually makes the decision as to which generic a consumer is going to get is the pharmacy. And so in many states, there's distributor liability such that a pharmacy who's making that decision, they should also be ensuring the adequacy of their drug.
How would a pharmacy do that at that point? I mean, because they seem to me to be like 3 times removed, right, from the actual manufacturing. I mean, I guess the pharmacies must be able to track, like, this is a active ingredient made at this factory or this company. Yes, is that?
Oh yeah, they can tell where it's made at.
So
you can see that in the batch numbers.
So theoretically, right, there are some pharmacies that are like, we don't sell pills with active ingredients that come from X, Y, or Z countries because the FDA doesn't have the resources to really police this stuff.
That's right.
Okay, where is this litigation now in the process, and where does it go?
So at this point, there are quite a few class action cases that have been filed where people are arguing that if we had known this was contaminated, then we would have never paid for this drug. So you don't necessarily have to be injured in order to be part of a class action. You're trying to recoup the monies that you were paying for a bad drug.
Right.
So we have those cases filed, but we also have quite a few personal injury cases, and they've been consolidated. All the personal injury cases and class action cases have been consolidated. They're being handled in front of Judge Kugler and Judge Schneider in the District of New Jersey.
And so that's again a multi-district litigation, right? And
that's correct.
In New Jersey. And how do you pick that venue, New Jersey? I mean, or is that just?
It's the responsibility of a panel of federal judges. It's called the JPML, and it's their job to figure out which federal jurisdiction would be suitable for a case like this. And so, Judge Kugler and Judge Schneider were a good fit for this case because they handled Benicar, which is also known as olmesartan. So they already had some background understanding of this class of medications.
Interesting. So that's the way that some venues are picked. And does it have any implications when it's all federal? We're all federal courts here, right? So
that's right.
It doesn't. The jurisdiction is less relevant. I mean, obviously for travel and issues like that, but the jurisdiction's less relevant. It's more specifically who the judges are, and those judges are picked by a panel based on maybe issues like they have understanding of this sort of type of litigation and this type of product.
That's right. And obviously what's going to drive a lot of it is their availability. They want to be making sure there's an even spread of cases amongst different litigations, and also that it's a convenient forum for the attorneys to be able to get to.
Is there any, are there heightened levels of responsibility in terms of how you collect damages from, let's say, the manufacturer of the pill versus the manufacturer of the active ingredient? Because there's like more, I guess, U.S. obligations maybe on the manufacturer of the pill, are there heightened liabilities there, or is the liability shared across all sort of classes of people involved in it?
Well, that's a great question, and the buck stops at the U.S. manufacturer. I mean, it's their job. In terms of generics, we've recognized, obviously, they're the Chinese company, they're bad actors. There's a very high standard in terms of what these U.S. manufacturers are required to do. And the liability standard is strict liability, such that if there's cancer in a pill, it doesn't matter if you did something wrong or not, you're liable for it.
Right. And they clearly don't have terribly strict testing regimes for this stuff. That's
right. And just to be clear, we do think they did something wrong on top of it, obviously. But the standard is so high that if there's cancer in a pill, you're strictly liable for it.
So now, do you go into discovery and try and find evidence that they had inklings about this and just didn't press too hard and thought they could just sort of make it somebody else's responsibility?
That's correct. And we've already felt like with some of the 438, those are the inspection reports that we've already been able to uncover. We've already have some of that information that we believe these manufacturers in the U.S. should have been on notice of this problem.
Oy. Horrible. And how many plaintiffs are we talking about? I mean, how many people? Has there been any type of like epidemiology studies that give us a sense of how many people we're talking about? I mean, how many people take this drug or did during those years, and how many do we have a sense of how many are suffering from cancer?
That's a good question. So we estimate that there are approximately 1.5 to 2 million people who are taking contaminated valsartan each year between 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. Now, some of those are the same people taking them throughout all those years. In fact, a lot of them are taking them for those years. The FDA came out early on, and they said that the incident rate was 1 in 8,000, that 1 in 8,000 people would be expected to get cancer. But we've looked into this, and we just think they're absolutely wrong, and that incident rate is much higher than the 1 in 8,000. And we've looked at meta-analyses of gastric cancer, for example, and we just think they're utilizing the wrong formula as to how they come up with that 1 in 8,000.
Who develops that formula? Is that internal development, or do they farm that out to the companies too?
Well, no, I think, and we're not sure. Maybe they do farm it out. That's a good question. But I know that the information first came out of EMA, so it might have been the European Medical Agency, and then the FDA basically adopted the same reasoning, and then we saw Health Canada adopt the same thing. But that was all early on. I don't think they're speaking to incident rate now because I think they recognize the problem, that it's very possibly a much higher incident rate, but they can't tell people that because they've already received 40,000 calls from the FDA agency. I mean, if they start telling people how high the incident rate is, I don't think they'd be able to handle the blowback.
Volume. Okay. All right. Lastly, so how long does this litigation stretch out? Do you have a notion?
Well, I mean, we got a pretty good example in Benacar. The judges that are overseeing this litigation, they're efficient. And we don't know how long this one will last because you don't necessarily know what the information that's going to be discovered or what the experts are going to testify this early on. But oftentimes you'll see somewhere in the process between 2 years for shorter litigation, sometimes as long as 5 years for some of the longer litigations.
Well, Daniel and I, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it.
All right, and we have another attorney coming from Levin Papantonio. If we could just let. There you go. That was not the most horrific. So sitting with me now is Archie Lamb. Archie, you are also an attorney with Levin Papantonio, is that right?
I am. I'm of counsel with Levin Papantonio.
And you're working on some cases that came out of the California fires.
Well, yeah. There are so many California wildfires, it's hard to really keep up. This is the Woolsey Fire. This fire started at Chatsworth Station in Ventura County, right on the L.A. County, Ventura County border. It's not the Pacific Gas and Electric cases in Northern California. This is Southern California Edison, a different public utility, but on their property it occurred. So that's the genesis of the case.
Okay, so the fire starts. Give us a sense of what the implications of the fire were. How many people impacted, homes, if there were any lives lost. Just give us a sense of what happened.
So what happened in this fire on November the 8th of last year, 2018, there had been a couple of days of really dangerous high winds, Santa Ana winds, as I'm sure you're familiar with, that caused the utility to be concerned and the municipal authorities to be concerned that the power lines may be subject to oscillating in contact and causing an arc, which is a known occurrence. So for some reason, even though there was a warning issued 2 days earlier, the power company decided not to connect the power to that particular substation.
Why would they make that conscious decision?
You should take the first deposition, because that is the very first question we're going to want to know. And by the way, California Fire, the state agency responsible for investigating, is doing exactly that investigation. And in the Thomas Fire, which is about a year earlier, occurred just north of where the Woolsey Fire occurred, Cal Fire decided that Southern Cal Edison was responsible for the occurrence. We're confident that based on our initial investigation and some videos that they're going to find the same thing in the Woolsey Fire.
So, okay. So they have an obligation to just, there's some basic protocols that they, for whatever reason, didn't follow. And as you get into discovery, you find these things out. Maybe somebody didn't want to lose the extra day or two of energy that they'd be providing, and that cuts into their profits. Or maybe it's just they had cut back on the number of personnel, and so they don't have enough people to actually pay attention to these things the way they should. What were the implications? How many people lost their homes? I mean, how big of a fire was this?
In this fire, started on November the 8th, 2018. Lasted for about 2 really strong days, day and a half. Wasn't really extinguished till the 14th, so November the 8th to the 12th, I'm sorry, not the 14th. But the point is, 100,000 acres, 1,500 structures were destroyed.
1,500
destroyed structures.
So it's
homes, restaurants, apartment buildings were destroyed. 250,000 people were displaced, and so many. One of our first clients was Christie's Roadhouse, right on Canaan Canyon Road. All the people that worked there lost their jobs, and so there are lots of different levels of injury: losing your home, losing your possessions, losing the place you work. We have a client that had a huge landscaping business, lost all of his trucks, all of his equipment. Gentleman owns a winery, lost all of his inventory, if you will, lost his entire crop. And so these people are at ground zero, and have to literally rebuild not just the physical facilities, but their lives.
And so it's not just a question of not shutting down that power station. What happened with that power station itself? I mean, how did that lead to the fire?
So 2:22 in the afternoon of November the 8th, an arc occurs, and there's an obligation on the public utility to
what does an arc mean?
When the wires touch, it causes a reaction in the internal monitoring system of the power source, and any abnormal behavior, they're required by law to report. So the report comes in at 2:22. Ironically, and fortuitously, frankly, at 2:24, 2 minutes later, a television helicopter from LA was headed up to the campfire site, the Northern California site where everyone died, to take video, and they got a video of 2 fires on either side of the Chatsworth substation 2 minutes after the arc.
Wow. Okay. So they the signal comes through their internal system like red flag, and this helicopter flies over and sees actual fire in the substation. And what do they do? What does the news team do?
The news team reports it to the 911, and it gets reported. But remember, these are the canyons, and I know between Westlake Village and Calabasas on the 101, you go through the canyons and what they call over the hill to Malibu, and it's curvy, windy,
right,
rocky, and so it was to some extent a really difficult accessibility issue. Also, at that time, the Malibu Fire Department were up assisting in the campfire cases in Northern California.
Wow. So they had less resources.
They had less resources, and this is a fire that was relatively small in the beginning, but it became a predator. It ran from several miles north of the 101, hopped the 101, and ran all the way through those canyons. 100,000 acres, Sam.
Wow.
All the way to the sea.
And so once that fire was ignited, now, I mean, I presume so in this case the electric company failed to just take the normal procedures that you would anticipate and that their own protocols would call for in anticipation of high winds like this. There is direct evidence that what one would anticipate could happen because of that wind happened, and the evidence was not only that they got the red flag through their system, but there was literally a helicopter that saw the fire start where it would start relative to that red flag.
Yeah, so it's sort of a dichotomy analysis. So since 1993, Southern Cal Edison has been fined and punished at least 7 or 8 times for failure to take reasonable care to do everything they could to prevent this type of event. A couple of different things. They could have done we think they did an analysis that decided 20 years ago or so that they should have buried the lines. Too expensive. They decided not to. Another part of the problem is the debris and buildup in and around the common areas of this part of California created a tinderbox, really, of potential damage. All of these things the power company knew. And under California law, there is strict liability. In other words, there's no question that if a fire starts in a public utility facility, they, the public utility, are responsible for the property damage of the homeowner, business owner that is damaged to whatever extent that property damage exists. Strict liability. The next level, and this is what you're talking about, and I don't want to be presumptuous, we believe in good faith that there are additional things that they knew and could have done and should have done, but that's part of our obligation to prove. But then that goes to the level of negligence or maybe worse.
Right.
And so that's what the litigation is about. Because if you get to negligence or worse, you get to the damages over and above property damage, pain and suffering, mental anguish, the post-traumatic stress disorder that is so palpable, so real in the eyes of these people who have 15-year-old, 17-year-old kids who will never again go to their school, never again be in that idyllic home that they had, that lifestyle with their friends. They're displaced. Those are real damages that if there is another level of misconduct or failure to act as they should have, these people would be entitled to.
One of the things I know from upstate New York, there's been a lot of consolidation really across like the Northeast in terms of the electric and gas companies. And what everybody says up there is it used to be that Niagara Mohawk, which was the company that ended up getting swallowed into National Grid, Niagara Mohawk would come by and they would regularly cut the trees around the power lines. And they would do all sorts of precautionary measures. And once National Grid came in, you would never see anybody doing that unless there was some type of special call or there was some type of other thing. And I mean, it feels like this is a similar type of dynamic where it's just like, we've done a cost-benefit analysis. We can get away with this. And how much of a responsibility, when they start to cut those corners, and they know that the incidence and intensity of these fires in California is increasing because of climate change, like how much responsibility do they have on that end of it? Like, because not only are they cutting back their responsibilities, but it's well known that the risk is increasing. Like, how much more responsibility do they have under that formula?
So the cornerstone of your question is you're asking me to assume that climate change is not fake news.
Well, yes.
Okay. All right. So, you know what's really tragically hilarious is that's part of what that whole notion of ignoring climate change is, so that they can avoid the liability associated with that pre-fire knowledge of the reality of what's happening in that space, over which they are responsible and obligated by federal and state statutes to avoid. It's reasonable care. They have a reasonable duty to prevent those things that they know or should have known are likely to be this combustible predator fire. We know they're coming again. It's going to happen in California because the Santa Ana winds, because the power lines are exposed, because the winds are 80 to 100 miles an hour. This stuff is going to happen. The debris that is the wood that starts and brush that's dry,
right,
with that arid climate, they can't avoid knowing that they ought to clean it up, certainly around the substation, to reduce the likelihood of a fast-moving fire, which this was.
How many of these fires are a function of these power stations? Because I feel like every time there's like one person who had a campfire that turned into a massive fire, or a homeless person who was living, in an area and lit a fire, like I hear about that. But you just don't hear so much, it seems to me, and maybe it's just I'm not in California. It doesn't get the same level of reporting, I guess.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. After 30 plus years of practicing law, every person that gets hit by a railroad train at a crossing that doesn't have gates and lights was trying to beat the train, is what the railroad says. Every time there's a plane crash, it's always the pilot's error, never a manufacturing defect. Every time there's a fire, it's an arsonist at the root of it all. And the fact of the matter, the fact of the matter is, sometimes that's true.
Right.
But it's incumbent on us as lawyers to make that assessment independently on behalf of the people who've lost their homes, their lives, their livelihood, their dream, to determine, is this truly Southern Cal Edison's fault? And if so, access the courts to achieve justice for those people and not let the rumor mongers defending this obligation these corporate folks have to pay for the sins, to hold them accountable. And that's what this battle is all about.
Well, Archie Lamb, thank you so much for your time today. Really interesting stuff.
Always good to be with you, Sam. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. All right, folks. And back in Brooklyn, we're going to run an interview I did yesterday with Andy Betterman. He is the chair of the AAJ Political Action Committee. And what this guy does is basically work on legislation, fight legislation that would inhibit the ability of lawyers like we've talked to today, for instance, and yesterday, to bring these cases. And it gives you a good general overview of what's going on here. Matt, are you ready to run that?
Yep, ready to go.
All right, let's run that, and then we'll come back with more. We are back, Sam Seder on the Majority Report, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, Nevada for the 2019 Mass Torts Conference. Joining me now is Andy Betterman. He is the chair of the AAJ Political Action Committee, PAC, also an attorney from the Washington, D.C. area, I guess. So, Andy, first off, let's start with what is the AAJ?
Okay, AAJ is the National Trial Lawyers Association organization. It's basically the National Bar Association, if you will, of civil trial lawyers who represent plaintiffs in their claims for compensation for all manner of injury, but especially personal injury against individuals, corporations, government, and so on. So AAJ stands, for the American Association for Justice. That's what AAJ is. I'm the volunteer chair of the Political Action Committee, and like most organizations in America, we also have a Political Action Committee, which is the only nonpartisan political action committee in the United States dedicated to the preservation of the civil justice system. In other words, we keep the courthouse doors open for every American.
Right, and that's one of the themes, obviously, of why I've been coming here, is because of that function. Like, why is that important? And, what does that mean? The courthouse door is open. Let's just start with why that's important, and then we'll get to the ways that that metaphorical door is sort of shut.
It's very important because the founders of our country contemplated and, in fact, designed a system in which every citizen had equal access to the courts and to the rule of law, regardless of their financial position in life. And that's what we do. I mean, when I say we keep the courthouse doors open, plaintiffs' lawyers like myself and those in AAJ do not charge a fee when a client hires us. We are paid on what's called a contingent fee basis, which means we get paid if and when the case resolves favorably for our client. And that, to me, is the great leveler, because it used to be that people thought they'd have to have thousands of dollars to pay a retainer to an attorney to get legal representation. With a contingent fee, which has been around at least 50 years, if not longer, you don't need that. All you need is a meritorious case and an attorney who's willing to take it, and you'll have access to the courts just like ExxonMobil, just like AT&T.
And, okay, so how does the doors, these metaphorical doors, how do
Yes.
they get shut?
Well, it's a good question. They get shut, for the most part, legislatively. And there's been an effort, again, throughout my 40 years at the bar, been an effort by business and industry to do just that by legislation. So to give you an example, a common law that's has been passed in many states, but not yet federally, is a cap on damages, which has been advocated for a generation by business and industry. And a cap on damages does just that. It places a limit on the amount of money a victim can recover for what's called non-economic loss, which is injury to basically your injury and your pain and suffering. So for instance, in a state like Maryland where I practice, we have a cap that 30 years ago, was under $100,000 and has been escalated to about $1 million, but we still have a cap. Some states have caps that are $250,000. So I've had cases where people have been horribly burned, and the most that they can recover for their injury, not for their economic loss, medical expenses, lost wages and have you, but the most they can recover for their injury and their scar, if you will, is about $1 million, when the case is worth far more than that.
And so, and we have many examples. People can go back and listen to the probably at this point dozens of interviews I've done with attorneys here.
Yes.
Where corporations will cut corners. They will. I mean, almost that's the best case scenario when we're talking about these cases. They'll cut corners and think they can it won't be a problem. A certain amount of negligence. There's also cases where they know this product is going to hurt people, but they've invested too much in the marketing. They've invested too much in the development. They need to, they need to create shareholder value. They go forward and they make a calculation.
Yes, they do.
We may have to pay out X amount of dollars,
yes, they do.
But that's going to be 10%, 5%, 2%,
right.
Maybe 25% of our profits.
Mm-hmm.
And so caps at that point do two things, right?
Right.
One, it basically it makes it less viable for an attorney to bring the case because you need an enormous amount of money to fight an Exxon or a DuPont or whatever it is. So you need to have built a war chest or gotten a line of credit or whatnot.
Right.
And it also undercuts the functioning of civil litigation as a sort of second order regulation.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't
deterrent.
inhibit as a deterrent.
Yes.
And so that's why why caps exist on some level. So there is no deterrent to this type of behavior.
Right. And in fact, a cap in many cases is a disincentive to the corporation or whoever the defendant is, the person or the corporation that you've made claim against. It's a disincentive to them to settle, because they know that if they go to trial and a jury finds for the plaintiff and is empathetic to the plaintiff and awards a lot of money, that most of it will be taken away to the extent that the award exceeds the cap. So it's really a disincentive to them to roll the dice. In states where there aren't caps, then you'll find that many defendants come to the settlement table much more readily and freely than they do in states where there are caps.
Do you does the AAJ PAC? Do you do work on a state level, or is it strictly federal?
Well, that's a good question. We raise money for federal races, for the Congress, the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And we help identify candidates who share our views about the court system, about equal access to the courts, and then we help them win election to office. And if they do, then we know where they stand on our issues.
Right.
We know where they stand on our issues. In the last election, we raised over $6 million. We supported 299 candidates for office. 85% of them won election. And we were instrumental in the election of the 40 members of the House, the 40 seats in the House that flipped from the GOP to the Democrats and hence placed Speaker Pelosi in the Speaker's chair and removed Speaker Ryan from the chair.
Now, Andy, I know you're a nonpartisan group. I'm going to guess, though, that Democrats tend to share your perspective more than Republicans.
We are a nonpartisan group, but practically speaking, most of the candidates that we support are members of the Democratic Party. There are some Republicans who share our views, and if there are, then we gladly support them. Give you an example. Senator Lindsey Graham is a great friend of the court system. Now, I've got nothing in common with him.
Right.
And I really, and in no way do I support him, but he is a senator from South Carolina. He's not going anywhere, but he has a guaranteed vote for us because he used to be a trial lawyer, and he understands the system and shares our views.
What are recent? What has been the most significant threat to the ability to bring cases in recent years? Has it been legislation? Has it been executive action, or has it been, frankly, just a judiciary that is been, seems to me, close to overwhelmed by conservative justice?
Yeah, I think it's legislation myself. I mean, judges will be judges. They'll make decisions, and they have tremendous power in our system. Executive orders less so. Legislation. I mean, AAJ, which maintains a lobby staff as well, last year dealt with, in the last session of Congress, addressed over 700 tort reform, 700 measures designed to close the courthouse doors, if you will. All right, one of them seeks to impose a $250,000 national cap on non-economic or pain and suffering damages, regulate attorneys' fees, which would then basically be a disincentive to attorneys to take cases if they can't make what they need to make when the case resolves to justify the investment of their time and money in a case. There was a bill in the last session. I mean, the most salient ones were the one to impose a national cap, regulate attorneys' fees, and that would apply to medical malpractice, nursing home, and pharmaceutical or bad drug and bad medical device cases. There was a bill to make it. Most of these cases are filed in sort of like a class action. It's not. It's called an MDL. But there was a bill that would basically mandate that within 45 days of filing your case, you have to file with the court proof that you're going to win without the benefit of civil discovery or information exchange. And that's virtually impossible to do.
So these multi-district litigation cases, so that's where, and we were talking to someone on yesterday's program about a case involving 3M's earplugs that they sold to the military. There are cases of damages, probably, of military personnel all across the country.
Yes.
Instead of all those issues being litigated in each state, they're wrapped up in federal court, and they're actually going to be tried in Pensacola.
Right.
In this instance, they could end up in any jurisdiction. And so I have two questions on that legislation. So one is that how do you, if you could prove the case in 45 days, why wouldn't you just prove the case in 45 days?
Because you can't, because as you know, in our system of civil litigation, right, the plaintiff files a complaint, the defendant files an answer, then you begin what's really a beautiful process called civil discovery. And the purpose of that is to literally allow each side to actually discover the other side's evidence. And there are a number of tools: written questions, document production requests, and depositions, which you've seen on many of your listeners have probably seen on television.
Right.
You know, where the witness is sworn under oath and is asked questions by the other attorney, right? And that's a lengthy process, and particularly in complex civil cases against large corporations, it takes months, if not years, to complete discovery. And typically, at the end of discovery, then, if the other side feels that it's not liable, it's going to file a motion to dismiss, right, which the judge then decides. Under this measure, which has not become law, right, you would have to, a lawyer who files a case would have to file prima facie proof, which is about 51%, right, that the defendant is liable within 45 days of filing. And that's virtually impossible.
I mean,
you know, so it's a way to it's another way to close the doors.
Right.
To eliminate plaintiffs, and slam the door shut.
So, and would that legislation basically say that there should not be discovery, essentially, or does
Well,
it
I mean, that's a
contemplate that
practical effect of
discovery?
it.
Right. Okay. Because, and people should
Practical
understand that what a company, and just for example, Mike Papantonio, who from Levin Papantonio, obviously used to do Ring of Fire with me, and occasionally still hops on. Maybe we can get him this week here, but. He does a case against DuPont over the C8, and they basically back up an 18-wheeler with millions of pages of documents and say, good luck. And, it comes from a firm that's a big firm that has a lot of money, has a lot of resources, has a lot of staff, and they actually went through the documents and found documents that even the 3M lawyers didn't realize were there, and
Right.
that's how this guy wins the case. The idea that you could do that process in 45 days
No, you
is
can't do it.
absolutely absurd.
It's virtually
so,
impossible.
Okay,
It
so
is impossible.
So clearly that's basically a poison pill for why specifically MDLs? Why multi?
Because that's the venue. That's where all the bad drug cases and the medical device cases end up. I mean, they're all. It's really. I mean, an MDL is a tool that the court system has to make it easier to handle large numbers of cases. It's like a class action. In a class action, each victim has to have the same. Each victim had to suffer the same injury as a result of the same act by the same defendant, right? And if you are such a victim, and a class is filed, and you can opt into the class, and you can get your share of whatever the ultimate award is without having to litigate your case. And the reason that the class actions are not used in bad drug cases is because in bad drug cases there may be common liability among all the defendants. In other words, the same evidence that proves the defendant's liable to you would prove the defendant's liable to me, but the victims have different injuries.
Okay,
Of
so
varying degrees.
I
Right.
take a medicine that's been tainted with jet fuel,
Yes.
let's say, to use an example that we may end up having a conversation about while we're here, and the company that produced that medicine did the same act that got that medicine into your bottle and my bottle.
Right.
But for me, it gives me colon cancer.
Right.
For you, it gives you,
Gives me a headache.
Gives you a headache, but it gives you maybe
Yes.
some type of like colitis.
A different
or
injury.
something.
A
Right.
different injury.
And so there's, and that's when you would need a multi-district
Right. And
litigation.
in a multi-district case, which really is where all of the cases that we talk about at this conference end up, virtually all of them, end up in a multi-district litigation, then you have the liability issue, which is common to all the victims, is handled commonly and once for the benefit of all the victims, right? But the injury part of the claim is obviously they vary from victim to victim, and they have to be handled individually.
And so they set up basically an algorithm, right?
Well, ultimately, I mean, if the case resolves, they set up a master, a matrix, if you will, that's used to determine who's entitled to compensation and to what extent. But this measure, which was introduced in the Congress, right, which was probably hatched at Big Pharma or the Chamber of Commerce or both, right, would essentially close that door, because no one can really produce prima facie proof within 45 days.
Right,
It's
that's
impossible.
absurd. What's the biggest piece of legislation that is actually passed? That has there been any?
No, there really hasn't, and I have to say, largely because of
mostly on state levels where we see this, right?
But federally, right? Federally, there's been very little significant tort reform legislation in the last decade, and it's largely because of AAJ. Now, I would say the most damaging thing. I mean, there was a court decision about mandatory arbitration.
Right. Was that
Right.
Concepcion and AT&T, or is
I
that
think so, yeah. I believe so, and we're fighting to overrule that legislatively. That's probably the biggest bad thing that's happened is forced arbitration. But none of these other measures have passed. There's no national cap. The courthouse doors are still open, right? There's still MDLs, but there's a lot of time and energy and money that's been invested and will continue to be invested by business in America to close those doors. And it's a drumbeat that I've been hearing. I've been practicing law since 1978, and I've been hearing this nonstop since then.
And they've used many tactics, ranging from like taking a story. I don't know, maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago now. I had a documentary filmmaker on who was here, who had done a documentary on the famous hot coffee case from McDonald's,
right,
which was lampooned
right.
but it turned out when people hear the details of it, it's pretty nuts.
Yes.
And that's been an ongoing. I mean, what does AAJ do in terms of from a cultural perspective, right? Because there's there's theories out there that legislation and politics are downstream from culture.
Yes.
Trial lawyers. I mean, you call yourself a plaintiff attorney.
Right.
Because trial lawyers have been maligned, and it's
unfairly.
I couldn't agree more, but there was a specific agenda behind that.
Right. So the best what we do is educate as best we can, and we tell our members, AAJ is sort of the mother organization of all the state trial lawyer associations. Each state has one, and AAJ is sort of the mothership, if you will, and we work closely with the state organizations. And for a long time we've been trying to educate people on the state level, but the best education is when a doubter is suddenly a victim.
Right. Well,
and once a doubter is a victim, then the doubter looks at things dramatically differently. President Trump, for instance, I was just speaking in the session there about the work of the PAC, and I always talk about President Trump, who loves to litigate when it suits his needs.
Right.
When it doesn't suit his needs, he hates lawyers, hates the court system. But he's an example of a guy who knows that when the doors are open for an individual, and that individual needs them open, it's good.
What would you say, do you have a sense of which state is the most hostile to civil litigation?
There are a number of states that have $250,000 caps. I can't tell you the names right now. They tend to be states, the states that are more hostile tend to be more rural,
right,
with smaller populations, and a history of real conservatism. Although interestingly, you had a state like Arizona where the right to, there's never been I believe there was a cap there that was held invalid by the state's high court because it contradicted the state's constitution, which guarantees everybody equal access to the courts.
Interesting.
And that's unusual for that state, which has a history of conservatism.
And that's a good dynamic that the court would interpret. It's almost like a poll tax, right?
Yes.
In some respects, as applied to the opportunity to have recourse in civil litigation. All right. Well, so let me just ask you this. I'm curious. You've been practicing since 1978. Has the behavior of corporate America changed significantly during that time, or is this a consistent animal that essentially each new endeavor, there's going to be a certain percentage of them that are willing to cut corners or to just nakedly ignore evidence that they have and are aware of that their product could be damaging, for example. Has that changed at all, one way or another?
Yes and yes. It's I think change on a national level is an incremental, slow process, just like legislation is. But I think some corporations have changed their behavior, but I think the vast majority have not. And what a corporation might have to pay victims, right, because of the failure of a product, really hasn't changed at all. I think it just remains an economic calculation for them, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, where the development costs are high, understandably. I just think they factor it in. That's all. A certain number of people are going to. Bottom line is they've invested so much money in the development of a product that they're going to do whatever they can do to keep that product on the market. And if they know or should know that there's going to be a problem with the product, they're just going to factor the cost of that into the cost of the product. That's simple. So things haven't changed that much, in my opinion. What has changed is the frequency with which they're called to account and ultimately have to pay. I think that's changed dramatically.
Has that gotten up, or?
I think it's increased. Yes, I think you see it a lot more.
Is that because of just the level of sophistication of?
I think it's because of the
plaintiffs' terms.
Because of the plaintiffs' bar, because of what plaintiffs' trial lawyers do. We keep America safe, and if it's not safe, we keep the courthouse doors open for you.
Well, Andrew Betterman, the director, their chair, I should say, of the AAJ Political Action Committee. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you
I really
for having me. I
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, folks. That's it for the legal portion of our show. Post-legal portion next. We're going to head into the fun half, I think. I should just say, though, it's funny. I ran into, yesterday during the broadcast, a guy walked by in this, and, I'm in like an exhibition hall. There's just booths that provide support for attorneys, essentially, all sorts of different type of things. Like these firms need loans to finance their cases. I was talking to a couple of people about, and the drug escapes me, so I'm not going to say the name of it because these drug names are insane. But apparently there was a drug that was given to adults as perhaps, I think it was an antipsychotic. I'm not 100% sure. And they started to give it to children without doing any tests on children. And it turned out that boys who were taking it, who would go through puberty, would develop large breasts. So significantly large that some of them started to lactate. And there had never been any testing on this drug on children. And there were a lot of cases that was started. And what the manufacturer of the drug did was simply just string it out long enough, knowing that a lot of these cases were held by small practitioners. They'd all taken out loans to finance the case, right? Because you don't get paid until you get, you don't get paid unless you win and until you win. And so all of these small practitioners are taking out the loans, and they basically all had to drop out because after a while, the debt burden became too intense for them. And so these kids who took these drugs, who are already obviously going through difficult times, that's why you're on a drug like that, had to go through high school with, 13-year-old boy, going through high school with, extended breasts, and there was no real accounting for this stuff.
You need another reason to abolish capitalism.
And so, it's interesting. There's all sorts of sort of like strange, I guess, business services that are here, and that's just one of them. Then there's other things like where they do intake of clients and all sorts of different things here. So anyways, I'm here at the desk doing my thing, and I see a guy walks up to the table, a guy I know, and I don't want to reveal too much because I don't know how much he wants to be identified. Maybe he will. I was hoping he would be around here so I could actually talk to him because he's got a very interesting background that would be interest of people here, but I'm not sure he'd want to talk about it. But the guy is sort of libertarian leaning. He's like one of the, I wouldn't call him a full hardcore libertarian, but he's sort of libertarian leaning. And he is here working on a startup with some of these cases, specifically the one that I talked about that drug that was given to 13-year-old kids. In fact, he and his partner, told me those stories. And they found these old dockets, and they're trying to revive them in some way. Anyways, he's working on this startup. And he and his buddy's from Texas, libertarian types, were very, very skeptical of this from an ideological perspective, because trial lawyers have been demonized for years, and with very specific intent by places like the Chamber of Commerce and whatnot, because these people go after big corporations. And they both cited the story of the hot coffee from McDonald's. Now, longtime listeners will remember on this program, maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago, I had multiple interviews with the documentary filmmaker who had gone back and made a movie called Hot Coffee about that case. And people my age certainly remember hearing about this, and it was a way to bash trial lawyers. This idea that some woman is suing McDonald's because her coffee was so hot, and she got burned a little bit, and was suing them for a ton of money. And
Wah.
Exactly. And this is what's wrong with America. People don't take personal responsibility. And if you look into that case, and if you have the opportunity to see that movie, definitely worth seeing the movie. But if you look into that case, you find out that you're talking about an elderly woman who got the coffee. The coffee was kept at a temperature that was exceedingly high because it saved McDonald's, because they had done, they had run their quantitative, some type of like McNamara-esque efficiency thing, and they found that if they kept the coffee at like 112 degrees, they could make more coffees and backlog them, save 12 cents an hour or something like that. So the coffee she got, the cup literally disintegrated, and it spilt into her crotch. She's an elderly woman. She needed reconstructive surgery. All she had asked from McDonald's was help with the surgery, and they wouldn't do it.
Well, shouldn't she have done research on the coffee before she went there?
Yeah, and
Right.
the cups.
As a responsible
Right.
consumer.
You bring your own cup, or you check out the cups.
I mean, she could have brought her own cup. I just think we need to live in more of a responsibility society.
That's a user problem.
And so in the end, she was just doing this because at first I think it was like they won't even apologize. And then ultimately through discovery, they found like this was by design to have the coffee that hot. And they changed their practices because of it, because of the lawsuit. But the general public used it for years. I mean, anytime, and I can't remember if this was in the 90s, I suspect it was.
I remember it from childhood.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
I
I
also
think
have a memory of people making fun of that lady.
So it must
yeah.
have been in the 90s, and I mean, I just remember Rush Limbaugh. I mean, that was like, you would just toss that off as an example of why lawyers are horrific. And so, and I was talking to these two guys who were recent converts to, understanding the sort of this dynamic. And I haven't caught up with my buddy, but I wonder if it hasn't, in some respects, begun to undercut his ideology on some level. But
I'd like to call it a libertarian perspective. Can't really hear
Okay.
you.
we will give them an opportunity to do so.
I feel
soon.
my concern is, okay, so is there a reason why she couldn't have called maybe like the CEO? Yeah, I can't really hear. But maybe she could have called the head of McDonald's and said, maybe we could work this out instead of trying to force the CEO to pay her in a compulsory manner. It could have been more free that way.
See, we didn't even need to figure out the phones. Michael can play every caller.
There you go.
That's it.
Why don't you sue who made her underwear instead?
But
I
maybe
guess-
don't, because then the underwear
I guess
maker
you
gets
can,
drawn. I
yeah.
just feel like she could have just said like, hey, look, maybe we could go and I could roll up my sleeves and you could roll up your sleeves and we could just kind of, talk this out. I don't know.
It was interesting what Archie Lamb was saying about climate change, because literally, I think yesterday in hearings, the head of the EPA said that climate change not their top priority. Just not gonna.
It's not doing it.
What the
Not
hell
gonna-
is wrong with people?
Well, I mean, I think
not one
to a
of our
certain extent,
priorities.
Archie Lamb, pointed out that not only would an acknowledgement of man-made climate change force the hands of fossil fuel companies, but it would also start to create sort of benchmarks. Like, okay, you're aware of another threat that exists out there, right? Like, we all know that you shouldn't have people walk across a busy highway. That's that's a danger. Once it becomes codified that the science, and once there is broad acceptance of the science of climate change, that puts obligations on all sorts of different industries, and to respond to this and to acknowledge it, and then to start to behave and change their behavior to comport with that acknowledged risk.
If we do something about climate change, then all of a sudden we might have to worry about our ingredients and other things.
That's right.
I mean, where does this end?
There is also, and I don't want to unleash the great Monsanto wars of 2013 or whatever it was.
I do. Grow up.
But
Monsanto's a bad company, and stop it your
Stop
freaking
it.
nerdery and
there
don't ever
is
call.
increasing evidence that that Roundup is carcinogenic.
Oh my God! I can't believe you're saying that. You're gonna destroy the whole biotech research. I want to argue about that for 45 minutes and send obsessive.
If there's one thing these major companies need, it's for people to stand for them and reply.
Yeah, you know what? Monsanto and Bayer, which actually acquired Monsanto recently, is to make it one of the most. And Bayer, I think Bayer has been covered at the Torts conference. For
Oh my
other
God!
things,
In
right?
fact, I had a conversation with another doctor who was telling me about a supplement that that you take to diminish inflammation, and apparently inflammation is in many different forms in our body is highly problematic, right? And in fact, everything from like PTSD is a function of inflammation in the brain, and he is a sports doctor of top athletes in the country, and has done a lot of work with folks from special ops who have problems. And he said, we've known for 25 years, science has known, Harvard research facility found that there was a vitamin, and or some type of supplement that would deal with inflammation, and it would deal with inflammation in such a way that it allowed the body to recover from the inflammation. But Bayer found that used their aspirin to function in the same way, except for it doesn't necessarily allow the body to recover from inflammation in the same way, and also can cause some stomach issues.
Now kids won't take their vitamins. Why are you talking about this?
So what happened is Bayer bought the patent for this drug or supplement and sat on it for 25 years. Basically took it out of the marketplace because it didn't want it competing against it. And it just came off patent about 5 years ago or something, and Harvard bought it back. And they're now starting to do all sorts of research with this and finding that it's how potentially effective it could be for a whole host of issues. But people just don't understand the depths of corporate behavior that is driven by profits. And so, things like buying the patent of a drug that is more effective than your drug and then sitting on it for 25 years, that is just simply called business.
But we should let these companies patent things like seeds and other forms of essential
And
to
parts
the entire
of the genome.
parts of the genome and things essential to the global food supply. Because if we don't, then obscure research projects at universities that none of us are talking about will be implicated.
But
I welcome your dumb calls.
I guess, but yeah, and the point is that for those people who believe in the efficacy of the market, you are completely deluding yourself as to the intentions and the incentive structure that exists for big players in the market. It does not, the amount of innovation that has been stifled. Electric vehicles. There was a similar dynamic. The amount of innovation that has been stifled because it threatens existing markets for corporations, somebody should be. I imagine there are books on this. If you know of a book about that, tell us. But
this is
just
Killing
a
the
dynamic
Future by
that people
Bill
do.
O'Reilly.
Exactly.
Killing Who Killed the
ongoing
Planet by
dynamic.
Bill O'Reilly.
Yep.
Hi, this is Rory. I'm calling with a libertarian perspective about that. And I'm wondering if you went to the company, I don't know, you say that they stopped the electric car. I don't know the history. I can't really hear it too well. But maybe if you went to the car companies and you said, hey, man, let's do some nonviolent communication together. And maybe you don't kill the electric car. And then that way there wouldn't be force. Did you ever think of doing that?
Yes, I did think about it. It didn't work.
Oh, so you could you give me the evidence that it didn't work? Because I thought we were having an evidence-based conversation.
This is just so tragically accurate. It's not even a comedy bit. It's
No,
really
I don't think freedom's a joke at all.
All right. We're going to take a break, head into the fun half. When we come back, we'll take your IMs. We'll attempt to take maybe some calls, and we'll do some sound. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support the free show, and then as a way of saying thank you, we give you access to the fun half. And as always, if you do not have the means to become a member, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com and wait, and then eventually we will get through all those emails and hook you up. Today is Friday, which means that tomorrow is Saturday, and then Sunday, and then Monday, and then Tuesday, and then what happens on Tuesday, Michael?
Well, it's funny you say that because what happens on Tuesday is Richard Wolff returns, but we're actually doing a Sunday TMBS because we're off the following week. And Adoma Kachietchu is going to join us to talk about her new book on the making of the Third World Project and what undid it. And also Derek Davidson will stop by. We'll be live at 7 p.m. on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. Of course, patreon.com/TMBS for the whole thing. But we're starting either at 6 or 7. I'm sorry. I'm not sure yet. I'll tweet that information out.
You and Jamie got to work that out, right, Jamie? Because what's happening on the Intifada this week?
Wait, actually, before we do that, there's 2 other things that I promised to plug. Teacher Lauren has asked me to say tomorrow at between 11 and 4 in Poughkeepsie, there'll be a parking lot of the Exempt Firemen's Association at 200 Mason Street. And there's an event on the Poughkeepsie DSA Facebook page, and it's Mid-Hudson DSA if anyone is interested. And also, of course, tickets to the TMBS LA Live show. And the Brazil Wires put out a new book called The Year of Lead, which I wrote the foreword to, and find a link to it on the homepage as well. Please support Brazil Wire and grab that book.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, in our free episode on Wednesday, we spoke with Brett and Brian, the chill anarchist dads from Street Fight Radio, about anarchism, organizing, parenting, drugs, and more. And today, for our patrons, we also released a bonus ep that we did with Leslie Lee III from Struggle Session. So check that out if you want to hear my vulgar Marxist take on the movie Us. Sean's vulgar Hegelian take on the movie Us, and Leslie Lee III's educated take on what the movie was actually about. So check it out, folks.
Matt.
Yeah, Literary Hangover did the Oscar Wilde, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. If you want to hear Oscar Wilde talk about socialism, check that out.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, and take a quick break and head into the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back, boy, back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, boy, back, and the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danner song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych. Fuck em.
Almost says what? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
All right, folks, we are back. It is the fun half of the Majority Report. And as you know, Julian Assange taken into custody in Britain for skipping bail. He is facing extradition charges to the United States, ostensibly for helping, in my understanding now of the indictment involving Assange, and it includes a lot of stuff that people should be very concerned about. Putting aside, we really need to be grown-ups here when we assess these things. I know people think that Assange has cooties. I am also maybe close to being in the cootie camp. But despite the fact that he has cooties, we don't want acts of journalism to be criminalized, because that will have very bad implications for our society moving forward. There are elements of that indictment that do that. The apparently the non-elements attacking his journalism is that he supposedly gave Chelsea Manning advice on how to crack some of the encryption, I guess, at the DOD. That advice turned out to not work, is my understanding, according to the indictment. So they're getting, and I don't think that's appropriate behavior. I think that that's probably chargeable insofar as if that is, can be proven true, like that you cross the line in that moment where you're not functioning as a journalist. Like, it's one thing to be a journalist, to get the information, to hide your source, protect your source. It's another to engage in the activity. The line has to be drawn at one point. You can take, someone provides you photos of someone in their house that's newsworthy. It's very different from breaking into that house and taking those photos. When Sky News reporters hacked into people's accounts to steal information from them, was criminal. So, with all that said, it seems that Julian Assange has lost a friend in Donald Trump. Here is a montage of Donald Trump in 2016 talking about WikiLeaks. He was really into WikiLeaks in 2016.
WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks. The Hillary Clinton documents released today by WikiLeaks make more clear than ever just how much is at stake in this election. So much corruption. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it. The WikiLeaks documents show how the media conspires and collaborates with Clinton campaign, including giving the questions and answers to Hillary Clinton before a debate. I don't get them. I want them. We love WikiLeaks. Boy, they have really WikiLeaks. They have revealed a lot. Justice said of Hillary, she has bad instincts. Now, we knew that. Just look at her career. In a newly released email, John Podesta has been caught saying, we have to dump all of those emails. Can you believe this? That's WikiLeaks. That's WikiLeaks. 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 Now from WikiLeaks. Did you see what came out over WikiLeaks? Oh, we love WikiLeaks. We've learned so much from WikiLeaks. 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 WikiLeaks just came out with lots of really unbelievable things. WikiLeaks. The WikiLeaks. 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 Again, nobody's covering WikiLeaks.
I sort of feel like he just loves saying the word. Or I should say, let me put it this way. Trump 2016, WikiLeaks hot. Trump 2019, WikiLeaks not. Play it.
Do you still love WikiLeaks?
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing. And I know there is something having to do with Julian Assange. I've been seeing what's happened with Assange, and that will be a determination, I would imagine, mostly by the Attorney General, who's doing an excellent job. So he'll be making a determination. I know nothing really about him. It's not my deal in life.
What would you like to see happen?
I don't really have any opinion. I know the Attorney General will be involved in that, and he'll make a decision. Okay,
Mr. President.
That is so
I totally grew out of my WikiLeaks phase.
It's not my deal in life.
It's not my thing in life.
No. It's not I grew out of my WikiLeaks phase. It's a I never listened to
Oh.
Snow.
Oh, you're
I
into
don't know.
WikiLeaks?
Oh, you mean the white reggae guy? I guess there's something along those lines, but I never was blasting
I might have had an
Informer in my
album, but I
car
never really
every
listened to
single day last. What?
I listened to the singles.
Yeah, I mean, I might have heard it at a party, but I certainly wasn't playing it on blast.
Katy Perry? I never listened to her.
I never
anymore.
listened to Katy.
No, but
I
you
never
were,
listened.
wait,
I
you
was
were
not
really
a Katy Perry fan.
You were a big fan of WikiLeaks. I never. I don't.
I
know.
never heard.
Wiki.
I mean, perhaps other people liked WikiLeaks, but this is
Trying to remember.
I mean, this is such a great lesson in fascism, though, right? Because I just feel like there's two. So one, it's like, okay, resistance types who are celebrating the Trump administration, are pressing these charges are demented. I mean, these are the same people that think that, like, oh, Trump called Jim Acosta a jerk, it's the end of journalism, are okay with this, which is odd. But then the left parts of the left were ridiculous on this because I remember those, the email leaks of 2016 were nothing. They barely revealed anything. And then, the actual stuff was 2011. But that being as it may, like, this is how people like this work. When it's expedient to have WikiLeaks, awesome. When it's time to put you in jail for revealing war crimes, great. That, like, how it would surprise anybody that Donald Trump or Mike Pompeo or Sean Hannity would have an expedient relationship with these things is highly diluted.
Right, and we should be clear that these charges stem from the 2011 leaks that included video image of U.S. military firing on Iraqi civilians. And it's really interesting to watch the news media recount, at least some of the reporters I've seen, who now acknowledge that the materials that were released by WikiLeaks that were taken and leaked by Chelsea Manning had legitimate news value. It's fascinating because I can tell you at that time they were in complete denial, despite the fact that literally every day you would see another article written based upon those cables. And so, we're going to see what happens. And again, there are parts of that indictment that are highly problematic. Part of the conspiracy that Assange and Manning took measures to conceal Manning as the source of disclosure of classified records to WikiLeaks. Like the idea you're protecting your source. Provide information, part of the conspiracies that Assange and Manning used a special folder on a cloud of Dropbox.
Used Dropbox and Signal. You go to Ken Klippenstein's Twitter page. He's a really good investigative reporter, and I think his pinned tweet is, "Here's my Signal number.
Right.
If you have something for me."
They all do this, and so the idea that this is part of the indictment is highly problematic. It seems to me, and credit where credit's due. Tulsi Gabbard went on. Was it on with? I
thought it was with Chris Matthews.
Chris Matthews to make this very point.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was arrested today for his alleged role in hacking classified U.S. military files. And I'm joined now by U.S. Representative and 2020 presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. What do you make of our effort to extradite and indict and punish probably Julian Assange?
I'm deeply concerned by what's happened today. We look back at the Obama administration's decision during his time not to do this, not to try to extradite Assange and charge him because of their concern about how this government action would impinge on freedom of the press. This is a blow to transparency and a blow to a free press when you have a situation where our government is in a position where they can basically create this climate of fear against somebody or those who are publishing things that they don't like or saying things that they don't like. And that's the concern here. This is a threat to journalists, but it's also something that threatens every American because the message that we are getting, that the American people are getting by what's happened here today is, be quiet, toe the line, otherwise there will be consequences.
And so good for her. I did not know
Definitely.
that there was an affirmative decision by the Obama administration to not extradite.
Well, they didn't. I don't know that there was an affirmative one, but at the end of the day, they didn't, as far as we know, they didn't press charges against him.
Well, this has been an ongoing investigation, this grand jury. Now, I don't know if it had shut down and that it had restarted. We're going to look into
Glenn Greenwald says regularly that the Obama administration stopped short at the end of the day of pressing these kind of charges. And I would assume he's pretty up on this, and as well as not looking to do the Obama administration any favors. So that's my understanding.
It's not inconceivable, too, that that the way that Trump makes most of his decisions is like, what did Obama do? Okay, do the other thing.
Wait, Obama stopped short. Guess what I'm not going to
who's
do?
Not stopping short.
Jump right over it.
Jump. I also just want to add too, like, again, I just, outside of the United States, there is no controversy amongst like center left and left parties about this position, like what the stakes of this are, and also what the initial revelations showed.
Yeah, without a doubt, there is. Without a doubt, somebody just came by and showed me a picture of Matt on somebody had taken a picture of the iPad that I have here streaming. Sorry.
I never heard of Ace of Base. I mean, people tell me they did music, and I was drinking Zima and listening to it, but that's not where. Perhaps you could ask Sarah or someone or Janine, but I don't know about them.
Cut to Sam dancing with wild abandon to Ace of Base at some Manhattan club in 1994.
I can assure you
I'm
that
sure you
I
weren't
was not
dancing.
a club goer at any age, frankly. I did go. There was a rock club in Worcester where in high school we would go dancing. All right, let's get back to some of the clips. We didn't play this yesterday. Katie Porter, part of the freshman class of Democrats who have entered into the House and are kicking some ass, frankly. Here is Katie Porter talking to Jamie Dimon at the House Financial Services Committee, and basically, particularly at a time where $3.6 billion they have made from the Trump tax cuts in 2018. Here's Katie Porter basically saying to Jamie Dimon, how can you possibly justify anything about you?
We left off was this woman had, and I apologize, you're going to need to follow orally. She had $2,425 a month. She rents a one-bedroom apartment. She and her daughter sleep together in the same room. In Irvine, California, that average one-bedroom apartment is going to be $1,600. She spends $100 on utilities. Take away the $1,700, and she has net $725. She's like me. She drives a 2008 minivan and has gas, $400 for car expenses and gas. Net $325. The Department of Agriculture says a low-cost food budget, that is ramen noodles, a low food budget is $400. That leaves her $77 in the red. She has a Cricket cell phone, the cheapest cell phone she can get for $40. She's in the red $117 a month. She has after-school childcare because the bank is open during normal business hours. That's $450 a month. That takes her down to negative $567 per month. My question for you, Mr. Dimon, is how should she manage this budget shortfall while she's working full-time at your bank?
I don't know that all your numbers are accurate. That number is generally a starter job.
She is a starting employee. She has a 6-year-old child. This is her first job.
You can get those jobs out of high school. She may have my job one day.
She may, but Mr. Dimon, she doesn't have the ability right now to spend your $31 million.
Always sympathetic.
She's short $567. What would you suggest she do?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Would you recommend that she take out a JP Morgan Chase credit card and run a deficit?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Would you recommend that she overdraft at your bank and be charged overdraft fees?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
So I know you have a lot
I'd love to call up and have a conversation about her financial affairs and if we could be helpful.
See if you can find a way for her to live on less than the minimum that I've described.
Just be helpful.
Well, I appreciate your desire to be helpful, but what I'd like you to do is provide a way for families to make ends meet so that little kids who are 6 years old living in a one-bedroom apartment with their mother aren't going hungry at night because they're $567 short from feeding themselves, clothing them. We allowed no money for clothing. We allowed no money for school lunches. We allowed no money for field trips, no money for medical, no money for prescription drugs, nothing. And she's short $567 already. Mr. Diamond, you know how to spend $31 million a year in salary, and you can't figure out how to make up a $567 a month shortfall. This is a budget problem you cannot solve.
With us, she does get full medical. We pay 90% of it. And we also give people...
No deductible?
There's a deductible, but for people doing their wellness programs, okay, we give the people making under $60,000 a year a $750 account.
Correct.
And effectively, they have no deductible.
That's why I didn't put any medical in, Mr. Diamond. I read that in your shareholder report. That's why I didn't include any medical expenses, but she's still short $567, as are all of your employees in Irvine, California. Any ideas? Okay.
Awkward. Super awkward.
I love that. Oh, she's like, yes, that's why I'm even giving you the most generous read, you psychopath.
Right.
And how the number is going to work.
When he comes in saying, I'd like to come in and see her finances, are you fucking... sorry, I keep swearing. Are you kidding me? That's like remember when Dennis Miller wanted to have like anybody on welfare?
Exactly.
Anybody who pays in income taxes should get their own welfare person that they get to like lord it over and make sure they're spending money correctly.
I'd like to see if she buys her child like a candy bar once every 2 weeks. Like, where are the expenses here that we can cut to make these people's lives more miserable?
Clearly she's the undeserving poor, feeding her child a candy bar.
I love the idea too that his first response is, well, someday she could be where I am. Now, first off, the chances of her being where he is, just generically speaking, obviously rather low for anybody because there's not that many people who can be the CEO. But never mind the fact that if you were to factor in the fact that she is a woman, it becomes even smaller. But the real point is that if she is running a $6,000 annual deficit, which would be theoretically financed by something that's going to charge her interest, she is just going to get deeper and deeper into a hole. So the way that people work their way up through society, to the extent that there's any mobility left, is to have the ability to take a chance on certain things. But as a single mother with a child, your chances, your ability to take risks are severely inhibited. The incentive for you to take risks, the costs of you taking risks are much higher because you have a child that you're supposed to take care of. You're the sole breadwinner. On top of that, the idea that you would be that much in the hole also inhibits your ability to take risks. And so it's just, it is... Talk about like the last refuge, right, for a scoundrel.
Well,
Like,
she gave him an incredibly serious, disturbing question, which exemplifies how everything works in this country. And his answer was basically an online university ad.
Right.
Well, Katie Porter laid it out very clearly. The way that they take risks, and what Jamie Dimon wants you to do is to take out a line of credit, which you will then be charged interest on. So he gets to double dip. First, by not paying his employees enough to live on, and then by getting the charges when they take out credit or have overdraft fees.
It's basically like the company store, right? And like
it is an upward redistribution of wealth.
From that same House Financial Services Committee, Ayanna Presley, also new member of the Democratic, the member of the freshman class of Democrats coming out of the Boston area. She asked Jamie Dimon, or I guess is this directed directly at Dimon? Well, here she makes the point about banks and their enormous fee structure, which just sucks money out of people. This is another good reason why we need postal banking, but I'm not going to get on that hobby horse. Here's Ayanna Presley.
Moving on, I want to quickly touch on another issue hurting our communities. While many banks have chosen to forego overdraft fees, Bank of America, Chase, and Citigroup still cling to these practices. Mr. Corbett, would you say that overdraft fees are a core function of your banking business?
No, they're not.
Mr. Moynihan, are you aware of what percentage your total revenue in 2018 came from these fees?
Overdraft fees?
Yes.
Probably less than 1%.
Okay, so if the answer is less than 1% or 2%, but for a family in my district hit with a series of overdraft fees, that is the difference between a tailspin and getting by. So your banks pay billions in fines dismissively, and you have convinced yourselves that overdraft fees that make up less than 2% of your revenue are essential to bank operations. If you can write off billions of fines at the cost of simply doing businesses, how are overdraft fees anything other than an ideological tool to simply further punish the poor? I'm appreciative of what you've shared here today relative to your community programs and development funds, but this does not shield you from criticism about discriminatory lending or the fact that many of you continue to put into practice overdraft fees, further punishing the poor.
You too could be a CEO, Congresswoman.
Yes. Well, someday I hope that you could be a bank executive and sit over here and see what it's like to lose 1% of your gross revenue. We have got some major bonuses. So, $3.6 billion.
And it's
JP
not
Morgan
just an
again.
ideological tool either. Like, it's very practical and material as a tool, because when poor people are immiserated, they are much easier to take advantage of. And he knows that.
I would also imagine that I would also be very curious to look at how many unique people get those overdraft charges. Because I suspect that if you're starting to pay extra fees for your overdrafts, the likelihood of you overdrafting in the future goes up. So in some respects, it's like we're creating our own market. If we get them once with the overdraft fees, I'm sure they have some type of data on what the incidence of overdraft fees after you've charged the first set of overdraft fees.
Yeah, it's exactly what Elizabeth Warren was talking about in her campaign ad when she says, these aren't cracks people are falling through, these are traps, right?
Indeed.
Now, Katie Porter, man, she's really, she doesn't have the same, media attention as an Ilhan Omar and AOC, but she's doing really good work there. Equifax a couple weeks ago. She's really coming through.
Lastly, from that same House Financial Services Committee, Cindy Axne from Indiana is
Iowa.
Is it Iowa? She is basically asking Jamie Dimon, how can you justify lowering capital requirements when we are, 10 years out from a massive meltdown in the financial sector, largely because banks like yours were over-leveraged?
Further, you have said in your annual letter that your biggest issue is with GSIB capital requirements. I'm assuming you'd like those to be lower, correct?
They should be properly done, whatever they are. They're not properly done.
You think the level is too high or too low? What are you saying?
The level is too high because America just gold-plated it and changed a bunch of rules that make it hard to...
So it should be, that would mean you would want it to be lower. So if those were lower, what would you use that capital for?
I agree that companies should invest to grow their businesses in their people, customers, products, or that is the number one purpose of a company. I don't like buying back stock. I prefer to invest. When you can't use capital in the short run,
Just to mention, though, you said in your letter to shareholders that you had excess capital.
This is
reclaiming my time.
For next year.
You said in your letter to shareholders that you had excess capital, and that's why you're doing buybacks, because you had excess capital. So you explained to them that you were using that excess capital to put more money in the pockets of shareholders.
In the short run, but as we are growing and expanding the 400 branches, we're probably coming to Iowa. We're expanding small business lending. We're expanding just about every business we have. We are starting to use that capital, and over time, I'm hoping we don't have any excess capital.
Reclaiming my time, it just doesn't sound like you'll be investing that capital and making more loans or investing in your firm. It sounds to me like you're asking for lower capital requirements, which would increase the risk to the economy and, of course, to our taxpayers, just so you can buy back more stock. So I'd briefly just like to say that, we've heard a lot from banks like yours that we can just relax this regulation or just that capital requirement because we're all in better shape right now. But we're not talking just about one regulation here. We've talked about capital levels today, but I didn't even mention now that banks have to prepare their full resolution plans just once every 4 years, or the way our stress tests have been weakened. So it's not just one area. And I'd like to remind everybody the purpose of this hearing is to look back on the past 10 years, and I hope that we don't see that happen again. I'm looking out for Iowans.
I love the fact that the guy is like, look, you can't hold me to the lies I've told my shareholders. Or, in other words, you can't... Congresswoman, you have no idea how difficult my job is, where I have to pretend one thing to you when I'm publicly bound, when I'm bound by law to publicly tell my shareholders, what's really going on. That's a tough... I'm having a thread and needle here, and you don't seem to have any appreciation for that.
I'm talking to you, not my shareholders.
I would so much love if he just got indignant and was like, look, I've got to be honest with my shareholders, so that makes it very difficult for me to come here in front of you. You don't seem to appreciate any of that.
You don't have any empathy. And incidentally, you know what? Even though you've been a total bitch, I would like to say, I think that you too one day could become the CEO of a bank. So there.
Oh, I thought liberals were really tolerant and sensitive.
Oh, I thought
guess
that
you're not.
I thought you were interested in hearing my ideas.
Clearly
Oh my
bigoted
God.
against persons of means.
But I mean, this is the big lie that we hear about these. First of all, like he's arguing that the capital, he wants to lower the capital requirements so that the bank can invest more. And by invest more, what he means is loan more, get more money back on loans. Or essentially go out, and I guess because we haven't created a firewall between their commercial and their financial services, invest and buy derivatives and whatnot, leverage themselves more, gamble more, essentially, with the money that supposedly creates the stability for the institution. And we have seen time and time again, when you give corporations, particularly in this environment, more money, all they do is juice their stock value by doing stock buybacks. Same thing happened with the big tax repatriation that was supposed to create all sorts of new jobs. We're going to lower their tax rates, taking money from overseas, and they all just do stock buybacks. And why do they do that? Because Jamie Dimon, his fellow C-suite executives, the board of directors, they all have big compensation packages that are directly a function of the value of the stock. And the reason why they do that, too, is because they also, when they get paid in their own stock, or any stock for that matter, their tax rate's even lower because it is subject to the capital gains tax as opposed to the wage tax. And so we've created this perverse incentive for them to juice their stock values because it's really just their side business. That's the way they get paid.
Yep. All signs point to us heading for another crash. It certainly doesn't help that there were very few meaningful restrictions and regulations imposed on Wall Street after the last one. The silver lining is that maybe if it happens under President Bernie or President Warren, they might actually nationalize the banks or take other steps that they would need to do in that situation.
Well, the thing is, I don't know that anyone knows right now what the systemic risks are. I don't think, we have a clear understanding of where that's growing yet. And it's growing somewhere. It's like, it's like in a dark closet, there's like some mushrooms and fungus growing in the corner. We just don't know it yet. Don't quite have the smell of that. But
Ew.
inevitably, something's going to happen. And again, it gets back to that conversation I was having with these finance guys the other night. Just the regulation. You can try and do the regulation from a surgical level, but inevitably, when you try and get that nuanced, industry comes in and blows your ability to do that out of the water. So there has to be some broad-based, and like you said, Jamie, nationalize the banks, or maybe broad legislation that puts up a firewall so that you cannot stay. And this is what you'll hear every time about the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. It would not have prevented the failure of the banks, and that is true. But what it would have done would have sequestered the damage. There's only so much you can do about bubbles and crashes.
Oh, yeah, they're endemic to capitalism.
But what you can do is create firewalls. Like, there's only so much you can do about the fire risk in a building. But the idea is that we have metal doors in big buildings that are kept shut, and that they're kept shut for a specific reason, so that there are you are maintaining egresses, and you are able to contain fires. And that's the whole point of a 21st Century Glass-Steagall, is so that you are making sure that if corporations want to go out, financial entities want to go out and gamble till 3 a.m, they're not doing it with the kids' college savings.
Where'd you pull that reference from?
I don't know. I have no idea where I got it.
Right.
It's a very evocative metaphor.
Firewalls.
Anyway,
Anyways,
moving on.
Oh, God. Should we take some phone calls? Did you dial into the thing?
No.
Michael is not dialed into the thing, no.
I will dial into the thing now.
I think I can do some IMs. Oh, you know what? I got a bunch of IMs. Let's just do the IMs. One night lemonade stand. Speaking to The Atlantic, Trump said he considered nominating Ivanka for the president of the World Bank because she's very good with numbers. Indeed, it's like Trump says, on a scale of 1 to 10, Ivanka's a 70 because she can be counted on. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Metaflight, could you bring on Lee Phillips to debunk eco-austerity, degrowth, and why the obstacle to climate change is markets and not economic growth itself? Chapo just had him on.
Lee Phillips, interesting. I've read a bit of him. I think he might be a good guest. I have some questions about it, to be honest. Though one thing I will say I tangentially like is he actually wrote a great piece in Jacobin about the sort of like liberal or whatever talking point about air conditioning specifically, to like turn off your air conditioning. You don't really need it. And how like actually, especially when you globalize it to like, a place like Bombay, that's actually like an extraordinarily classist and austerity-based thing, which jeopardizes, people's lives, primarily poor people who don't have the choice to kind of like be a little hotter or not. But we can look into it more.
PJ, here is a quote sandwich for you guys. Dave Rubin, MLK would be a Republican. Michael Brooks, Dave Rubin is a moron. Dave Rubin, I'm insulted. I will not debate Sam. Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings. By the way, Dave recently told Ben Shapiro he was trying to respect Shabbat more, and more he predicts that in a few years he'll become pro-life. Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, girl, swipe right, and let's do a 2-person class action. Is it legal? Don't know. Bring a judge.
Wow. This guy's bouncing back.
Gregory from Oklahoma. Sam, I never noticed all your ums and ahs as problems when you speak. I guess it's because I do a lot, too, and was made fun of it for when I was younger, and I still do it today. The fact that you do ums and ahs makes me feel better about myself because I want to start my own YouTube show and podcast. Well,
Yep.
You've just exposed the reason why I do it.
Well, here's the thing, though. Don't make fun of Gregory. Make fun of Sam.
There you go. I will take your heat, Gregory. Waterboat from Kashmir. Listening to Michael's libertarian impressions, I had an epiphany. If Sam Harris didn't have a trust fund, he would likely be one of those libertarian logic lord callers.
Yes.
I swear I could hear Sam Harris in one of those expressions, and I would like to think Michael slipped it in there on purpose. Anthony from Baltimore. I remember that McDonald hot coffee case. Part of the lawsuit was the victim went through, stipulated that she could not publicly talk about the case or its outcomes for an extended period of time and remain silent, which allowed McDonald's to spin the narrative to be about a supposed litigious woman who took advantage of lawsuits to sue McDonald's, and they were definitely effective in forming the average person's perception of the case. Indeed. And, frankly, I'm not convinced that that dynamic is not a technique that's used by, I don't know, new attorney generals. Oppenhead, do you think the indictment does not cover 2016 since it could also implicate the Trump camp? Also, always love the Tort Week shows. Sam, if you didn't strike it big on your Rumspringa, check out Herbs and Rye, 50% off all steaks during happy hour. Maybe you can swallow it this time. I don't know. I love Sarah Palin. Hey, Sam, I saw you on Hayes No? I didn't know you were a rabbi. Oh, okay, that's a joke. Media sucks so bad. I need one of these people to ask Republicans, what exactly is the humanitarian crisis when they say there's a humanitarian crisis at the border? Yeah, of course.
They mean a demographic crisis in our country.
Right. They mean, exactly. They mean our electoral prospects are jeopardized by people who aren't white living here.
The only humanitarian crisis at the border is the one that they created.
What just happened? Oh, here we go. Smooth Court movie recommendation. I finally watched the HBO doc about Theranos, and it was very good. It's not just about Elizabeth Holmes, crazy person, but gets into how inept corporate governance can be. The original board included George Shultz, Jim Mattis, and Henry Kissinger, who's shown not knowing how his speakerphone works.
Yeah, Kissinger at one point. Go ahead. Kissinger at one point just says like this: these meetings were so boring they felt like human rights violations.
And it turns out famous lawyer David Boies is psycho.
Pick.
The other thing that I apparently in a book about Theranos is that the reason why they based in Arizona, or where I don't know if they based there or they started their work there, was because of loose regulatory regime in Arizona.
I think you mean pro-business policies.
Pro-business policies. Sorry, pro-business policies. Secret Identity Politics, 2 pieces of reading for you folks. First, the ex-pope wrote a 5,500 words on how sexual revolution of the 60s is responsible for child abuse in the Catholic Church. Straight bonkers.
Yeah, there was no problems in the Catholic Church until the 60s came along.
Look, before the 60s, there was nothing happen. We were never a medieval global sex trafficking ring. Every time we were just doing a Eucharist, and then all of a sudden all the hippies come out, and all of a sudden they want to have a sex with the boys.
Was the old Pope Italian, though?
Cancel hair.
He was German.
Right. Excuse me.
Ratzinger.
Ratzinger. Okay. Right. Ratzinger's like, it was because of the music.
Gypsies, tramps, and thieves.
Jefferson Airplane made us get attracted to children.
One pill made me smaller. Hey, MR Crew, calling from Nebraska. Tensions rise in Nebraska unicameral as Governor Ricketts and his goons postpone Medicaid expansion another 18 months while adding unnecessary restrictions to receive Medicaid after the electorate voted to expand Medicaid in November. It's unbelievable. I mean, what's going on in the states, in these Republican states, and just how willing they are to completely ignore referendums, and they don't seem to get terribly punished for it. I mean, Snyder did this in Michigan insofar as the emergency manager rule, years ago, and doesn't seem to pay any type of price.
Well, that's part of the don't you? That's also just part of the problem of because I think a lot about Idaho because Luke is still working on that and because they're trying to reverse the Medicaid expansion, and this is where the challenge of the fact that you can totally get Republican-based voters to vote the right way on something like that, but not, punish the politicians that would ignore their will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the solution is other than I don't know. I mean, in that Medicaid expansion, the Supreme Court managed to tie themselves into a pretzel to somehow find that it was too coercive for the federal government to expand Medicaid. All right, let's just turn back into how Donald Trump is very excited about Bill Barr's claims that his campaign was spied on, just like COINTELPRO. I'm like Abby Hoffman. I'm like Abby Hoffman and MLK.
It's like Abby Hoffman. It's like Huey Newton and me. The struggle is real.
And here is Trump basically announcing, I hired only the best person.
Mr. President, are you pleased that your Attorney General yesterday said that there was spying into your campaign in 2016?
Yes, I am. I think what he said was absolutely true. There was absolutely spying into my campaign. I'll go a step further. In my opinion, it was illegal spying, unprecedented spying, and something that should never be allowed to happen in our country again. And I think his answer was actually a very accurate one, and a lot of people saw that. And a lot of people understand, many people understand the situation and want to be open to that situation. Hard to believe it could have happened, but it did. There was spying in my campaign, and his answer was a very accurate one.
Many people.
And
Here is... Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's precedences for campaigns spying on other campaigns. No, we're not getting into if this is illegal spying. If there was spying, there's precedents for spying. I mean, LBJ spied on Nixon because Nixon was scuttling the Vietnamese peace talks. So
he was undermining the Paris peace talks, right? With double dealing by Henry Kissinger.
And in this instance, the spying that took place on the campaign, to the extent that we're aware of it, was a function of campaign operatives and in some instances just people who were under surveillance joining the campaign.
Actually, very similar to what happened between LBJ and Nixon. I forget what her name was, but the Dragon Lady was the back channel to Vietnam. Like it's.
Well, you mean Shanghai Shek's wife?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, Madame Shanghai Shek. She's a major figure in right-wing politics.
Okay, but that's deep. That's history.
Okay.
I'm saying it's unprecedented now.
I was at an orgy with Roy Cohn and Madame Shanghai Shek once, so I think I know the history.
I'm saying it's unprecedented in the present.
As far as anybody knows.
It's unprecedented now, not in history. So, and speaking of in-depth analysis of this, Ainsley Earhart on Fox and Friends weighs in with a really good question.
If a presidential candidate is being spied on, shouldn't everyone be concerned about that to find out why that's happening?
To
if
use
this were happening,
the mechanisms of the federal government
exactly,
to spy on
like
a
the FISA
political
court.
Opponent. Unbelievable.
If the roles were reversed, if we found out that Hillary Clinton's campaign was being spied on, don't you think everyone would be upset about that? It's such a double standard. What's wrong with just asking how this happened? If there is spying, we want to know more information about it, period.
If we knew it took place and to...
Yeah, I can only imagine how upset they would be about Hillary Clinton being spied on. I mean,
do you even understand? Do you even care?
It's I have to say the Attorney General and the way that they are playing this is very, very effective now, right? Because we have moved on to waiting for the Mueller report, and when it does show up in a couple of days or in a week or whenever it is, it's going to be heavily redacted, and then the news story is going to move to this ongoing investigation of how the investigation investigation was launched. That, I imagine, will be heavily redacted, but the redactions will probably create a narrative that Donald Trump will be coasting on for months to come. And this is how it's going to go. And so ultimately, we're back to where we've been the entire time, which is that people need to mobilize against Donald Trump and others and vote him out ultimately. Oh, should we talk about Ilhan Omar?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're concerned about, the prospect of politicians being spied on generally, what about mass incitement against one of them who's facing unprecedented death threats, most likely from entirely made up of people that watch your network?
Here is, here's an image of the New York Post that really smears Ilhan Omar. I mean, this is, and what is it exactly? Like, some people did something. It was they're criticizing her for.
That's
right?
what they're doing, and as she pointed out, by the way, she said that in his iconic call to arms, and it might be embarrassing, but I think it was literally when George W. Bush went and did the bullhorn thing at Ground Zero, when he had a 90% approval rating and was taking us into global wars. He said, "Those people that knocked down the buildings," I'm paraphrasing. So Ilhan tweeted out and was like, right. It's essentially the same, that's the same formulation. In a way, you don't want to give them added respect.
It's very clear, there's two, suppositions put forward for what she means by that. One, I think, and what we all think, is that she's trying to distance the community of Muslims that she's talking to from terrorists.
The whole speech is about that.
Exactly.
Yes, that's what she's doing.
And the very transparent smear suggestion is that she's expressing some sort of sympathy or something with 9/11 attacks.
Or just minimizing it.
Yeah, she's being flippant about it or whatever. But the thing that's hilarious to me, though, is if the New York Post is so offended by this flippant, re-traumatizing language about something so horrible that happened to New Yorkers, their answer to that is to show New Yorkers a picture of it.
That's always been that's always been the formula. But of course, it's hypocritical. What the interesting thing here to me is just how relentlessly they have decided to go after her and demonize her, and how easily they can go away. And this is what the problem was with the Democratic Party. And they didn't go through with it, essentially, because most of the caucus, I think, there was blowback within the caucus. But when you start to take the right-wing frame and go after one of your own, what happens is you give them the green light. They see a huge opening because you have already positioned yourself rhetorically in such a manner that it's going to be hard for you to defend her. And so here she is on Colbert's show the other night, basically, making it clear that she knows she's being demonized because she's an immigrant, because she's Muslim, because she's a woman of color. And she's not going to have it.
And so in this process, I'm learning that everything is not as simple as we might think we might want to state it. And as I've said to my constituents, to my colleagues, when you tell me that you are pained by something that I say, I will always listen and I will acknowledge your pain. It's the same that I expect. So when you have people on Fox News that question whether I'm actually American or I put America first, I expect my colleagues to also say that's not okay, like that they should condone that and call that out. Exactly.
On the friendly
right.
Friends
Or
Fox
when
and Friends
when
this morning,
people call me a terrorist, or when people say, you know, that because I'm a Muslim, I'm an immigrant, I'm a refugee, that I can't have any loyalty to our country. I took an oath. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I am as American as everyone else is. And this kind of double standard really is quite, you know, offensive, and is very much embedded in a lot of our culture these days, where you will have people come after minorities for things that they say they might have insinuated, but no one goes after people like the folks on Fox and Friends that actually say those words. It's not about insinuation, right? They actually said that I might not be an American, my loyalties might not be to this country, but I get called out. They don't. They get to keep their show.
I would say that goes as far as me too. I was when I heard that you had been you had said that you believed that Stephen Miller is a white nationalist, and you got a lot of heat for that. I thought, haven't I said that? Yeah. Haven't I actually? Don't we make jokes about that all the time on the show?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's unfair because you get attacked, A, because of some of the history you already have in terms of being a cudgel in the area of anti-Semitism, people accusations, regardless of your apology. But also, I think because you're a Muslim, because you're a woman, because you're a person of color, you're given less latitude than somebody like me.
Right. I mean, Congressman Mark Buchan actually said that last year he called the Stephen Miller white supremacist, and no one has better than I. And you see this outrage when I speak the truth. Everyone else's truth is allowed, but my truth can never be.
And let me just add. Omar's analogy with Pocan is far better, obviously, than Colbert saying, like, I don't get called out. Because he's a comedian. He's a late-night comedian. There should be a higher standard in terms of what is appropriate for you to say if you are a public official. If you're an elected official, you should be held to a higher standard than a late-night TV talk show host. But the real analogy is that Pocan says this, and frankly, I think they're both right, but they can't demonize a middle-aged white guy.
He is gay, but yeah, not as inviting.
They can't demonize a middle-aged white guy in the way that they can demonize a woman of color, a young woman of color. I mean, it's like it is completely, and there's a reason for this. It's because their party is 90% white and dominated by white males. I mean, and so they feel much more comfortable. And the subsection of white males and white people in this country who are much more comfortable in demonizing people of color. Black people, brown people, women. I mean, that's just Muslims. I mean, that is just the truth. There couldn't be more data on this, and that's just the reality. And one of the guys who's been out there slamming Ilhan Omar is Dan Crenshaw, the guy who gained some measure of cultural authority because a comedian on Saturday Night Live made fun of him because of his eye patch. And then because the comedian apologized, suddenly Dan Crenshaw has been elevated to some type of national figure. And he was leading the charge about slamming Ilhan Omar for saying some people did something in New York. And meanwhile, Daily News reports today that a retired firefighter from New York City was trying to introduce himself to Crenshaw while lobbying members of Congress about renewing the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. This is early. It's about 3 weeks ago. And there's a lot of people who are suffering to this day from 9/11, a lot of particularly first responders who were down on the pile, they called it, and broadly in that area, and the air quality was horrible. The Bush EPA did not want to report on what was going on with the air because they didn't want people to panic. Too many of the first responders were down there without masks and whatnot because there was no official reason to believe that it was dangerous, and inhaled all sorts of things like small particulate, asbestos and whatnot, and are suffering from cancers and respiratory problems. And so this firefighter, Rob Serra, who is wheelchair bound, may have lost that may have been injury, may have been a function. He lost obviously a bunch of colleagues on September 11th. You can still, there's plenty of firehouses in New York City you can walk by and see the memorials to people. But this Dan Crenshaw, who's so concerned about the idea that she would say something happened by some people, blew off this firefighter. Said he was too busy to talk to him. Somebody in his office would get back to him, never heard back.
It's weird. Dan Crenshaw also, if you search Dan Crenshaw Facebook administrator, administrated a Tea Party Facebook group that was really, really racist with like Corey Stewart and a few other like sort of Tea Party Republicans. And when asked about it, he's like, I don't even know how this is news. I barely went on that website.
I'm sure he just liked it. He didn't really engage with it. But no, I mean, like all Republicans, Dan Crenshaw and many Democrats, that he's more he's interested in a firefighter as a prop, not as a person that needs funding. He doesn't care.
Of course. And this is what that kind of respectability politics and politeness policing always does, is it distracts from the real issue at hand and the thing that people were talking about in the first place.
And getting back to the point of the Democratic Party needs to circle the wagons around these, folks like Ilhan Omar and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and all of the, particularly women, and it should be the case for all the members of the Democratic caucus, but it just so happens that the women obviously are, and the women of color are targeted more by the right. And the idea that you need to have Democratic leaders who have political cachet providing some cover and pushing back and saying, like, look, I mean, this is really basic stuff.
Well, I mean, we know that not only were
they're compromised by money from AIPAC, they're never going to do that.
Here is Waleed Shahid. He was on Chris Hayes, I guess, last night, basically asking this question. And this is an important question that needs to be continually asked. And I'm glad to see it being asked on the on MSNBC, because these Democratic leaders need to be held to account as well. They need to come out, whether it's in Congress or in the candidates. Those people who have the airtime need to dedicate some of that to protecting their freshman caucus.
Beef with that, and this seems like just a bad faith, out of context hit job to me.
I mean, there's a 200-mile-per-hour ideological right-wing war machine coming after Ilhan Omar and also Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My question is, where is the Democratic Party leadership on this? You didn't see that many comments today from candidates running for president in 2020. You didn't see that many comments from Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or Chuck Schumer, for that matter. Instead, what we've seen is a pattern from the Democratic Party leadership that tries to distance distance themselves away from these three women instead of seeing these women as the rising leaders in the party who they have to fight for. When you are faced with this war machine, you've got to fight back and you've got to defend people in your party. And just last week, Nancy Pelosi said something like the women with the large amounts of Twitter followers are not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party. But I think we need a Democratic Party that actually fights for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for Ilhan Omar, for Rashida Tlaib against these attacks, because they can't keep running away from it and, make fun of them at AIPAC like Schumer and Hoyer did, or pile on the attacks. So I was actually pretty saddened to see it was just these women sticking up for each other, the three women who I've mentioned, and Ayanna Pressley, but not much from the leadership.
That, Waleed, to me is like when you talk about the Democratic leadership doesn't want a bunch of controversy every week, right? Like from their perspective, it's like Ilhan Omar does not care that they're coming after her, clearly. She's not going to be cowed. I think that's also true of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's true of Rashida Tlaib. And the sort of posture and politics of the Democratic leadership is like, we don't want to be on Fox News every night, and we don't want to be fighting these defensive fights.
Well, we're kind of in a battle globally for the fate of multiracial liberal democracy, so they don't really have a choice. Yeah. Like Ilhan Omar represents multiracial liberal democracy just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does, or Rashida Tlaib. That is the fight that we're having all over the world, from America to New Zealand, and we really have to, the Democratic Party needs to be the fight of the party of multiracial liberalism. The conservatives are going to war for conservatism. Liberals should go to war for liberalism.
But, to address Hayes's characterization of what is motivating someone like Pelosi or Hoyer or Schumer, them coming out in defense of these people is not going to get them on Fox. That's the whole point. Fox News is focused on these three, and it is not for the sake of people who watch Fox. Those people are never coming around. It does not matter what they say. What it matters is for all the people in the middle of the Democratic Party, for the people the constituents in her district. It matters because it's basically also sending a message to the rest of the Democratic caucus. We will be here for you. We need you here for us when we need certain votes or whatever it is. It is just, you do it for the sake of cohesion. You do it for the sake of saying, we will protect you. We will defend you. We will not go out there and add fuel to the fire. And it doesn't even have to be as extensive of a response, as far as I'm concerned, by Waleed. I mean, I think his point was correct, but it can be as simple as look, theoretically, these are your teammates, and you don't have to go out there and defend their ideology to defend them from spurious attacks.
But we know that isn't, this is where the AIPAC dimension and the serious ideological differences in the Democratic Party do show up, because, and maybe even generational, because I do think what's-his-face, Max Rose, who's very right-wing, I think Staten Island Democrat, he did kind of actually do that. And that might just be because, but all these other ones, I would say, I don't think Schumer and Hoyer and Pelosi just made fun of her at AIPAC. I would say that Schumer and Hoyer were borderline inciting against her at AIPAC, and Pelosi was not that far, but absolutely smearing and distorting her. And this is where the Haim Sabin, role, and the just fact that there are some serious, massive dysfunction and really toxic ideology inside the Democratic Party. It's not just a question of ducking.
There's a war going on right now within the Democratic Party. So these people, the Pelosi's and the Schumers, they have not seen enough from the progressive wing yet to know that this is a more winning strategy than what they've been doing. They're not willing to give up that money from donors and the fealty from donors, and also just power within the party, in exchange for something that they see as vaguely threatening and insane.
All right. Lastly, let's turn to the House hearing on climate change. You have a Republican, Thomas Massey. This happened from 2 days ago. John Kerry, I guess, was testifying to the House on climate change. And Tom Massey, a Republican from Kentucky, let's just play this clip. He's questioning John Kerry. How is it possible that you got a Bachelor of Arts in science, political science? Here we go.
Secretary Kerry, I want to read part of your statement back to you. Instead of convening a kangaroo court, the president might want to talk with the educated adults he once trusted to fill his top national security positions. It sounds like you're questioning the credentials of the president's advisors currently, but I don't think we should question your credentials today. Isn't it true you have a science degree from Yale? What's that?
Bachelor of Arts degree.
Is it a political science degree?
Yes, political science.
So how do you get a Bachelor of Arts in a science?
Well, it's liberal arts education and degree. It's a bachelor.
Okay, so it's not really science. So I think it's somewhat appropriate that somebody with a pseudoscience degree is here pushing pseudoscience in front of our committee today. I want to ask you...
Are you serious? I mean, this is really serious happening here?
You know what? It is serious. You're calling the president's cabinet a kangaroo court. Is that serious?
I'm not calling his cabinet a kangaroo court. I'm calling this committee that he's putting together a kangaroo committee.
What are you saying, that he doesn't have educated adults there now?
I don't know who it has yet because it's secret.
Well, you said it in your testimony.
Why would he have to have a secret analysis of climate change?
I just, like...
That's pretty good.
I love how John Kerry was just like, am I being put on here? Is this a surprise birthday party for me?
That was a very effective response from Kerry. Are you serious? Is this a thing that's happening
When
right
Kerry lets himself do, he's basically really is just like a good patrician dickwad. And instead of like pretending to be like respectful of his lessers, he should just do more of like, seriously?
He would have won.
Yeah. Really? Is that a joke? Is this a Sasha? My grandkids like Sacha Baron Cohen.
I'm sorry. I mean, like, he also had the advantage of it being completely bat crap crazy, where a congressman was like, "You've got pseudoscience, right? Like, you've got a Bachelor of Arts, but it's in science."
I mean, how many members of Congress or a general in the government have science degrees versus, say, law degrees or?
Do you think that, the only thing that I can think in this instance is that he knows what he's saying is gibberish, but he also knows that that broad swaths of his constituency and the Republican Party constituency looks upon the idea of college and the idea of like just saying the words Bachelor of Arts just triggers their anti-intellectualism and their sense of like what an elitist.
Oh yeah, the base
was part
eats
of
that
it?
shit up. That's what I was gonna say. Like they have a hatred of elites, which is defined by right-wing populism as academics, experts, and people who think they're smarter than you.
I'm looking for it. No, I lost track of this, but no, he sent out some type of like, that wasn't what I said sort of tweet.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to find it.
Well, I guess on Twitter you're backing off it because you may have like a different constituency on Twitter.
No, I mean, they do stuff like that all the time, but I feel like he would have done it a little bit better. That was not well executed.
You did not make fun of me. I made fun of you.
Right. You were mocked, sir.
You
myself.
got burned.
It
You
still
got burned.
comes off like
You
he
got burned.
owned a nerd.
Yeah, exactly. You got burned.
And it doesn't matter if Massey went to MIT himself or whatever, because he's directing the hatred at the guy who comes off like someone who thinks he's fancy.
Not that exchange. No, Kerry came off like he owned a nerd.
Yeah.
Massey has glasses, and Kerry was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And so that's. The
I mean,
takeaway.
all that really shows you is the type of staff that Massey has working on his prep, because it's like, how can we own this nerd? Oh, look, he got a political science degree. They literally just went to his Wikipedia page and looked for something to dunk on, and then they decided.
Yeah, and he
that's
didn't
when
deliver
do
it confidently.
They
so
did
that was
not
a
do
fail.
it competently.
Fail.
All right, a couple IMs and we'll get out of here. Winnipeg Craig, Sam, on last Friday's show, someone sent in an IM saying you would collectively cover Canadian politics more when we got another crack-smoking mayor. It's like the listener is totally unaware that Doug Ford, the brother and longtime political partner of the crack-smoking, now deceased former mayor Rob Ford, is now the premier of Ontario.
But does he smoke crack?
Province. Doug is long rumored to have been a drug dealer earlier in life and involved in as many ludicrous controversies as his brother.
Yeah, but he didn't say, does he get high in his own supply?
It's a bad idea. That way you won't make any money.
Salvatore, is MR going to mention the European elections or spend any time on the socialist Spitzen candidate Franz Timmermans? Maybe. JJ Cool. Do you guys have any thoughts on litigation in progressive society? The more complex the legal system is, the more beneficial it is to those who are able to take advantage of the system. I mean, I think the idea that the more complex any system is, the more beneficial it is to those who are better able to take advantage of the system. I mean, that's, like, I guess, a tautology. I think in the context of the society we live in now, with the limitations that we have with our regulatory state, I think that what's happens with these lawyers is super necessary. There is a lower standard for culpability in civil litigation than in criminal. And just the talk we had yesterday with Bridie Farrell, who just was working on getting New York state law to change the statute of limitations for children who are sexually assaulted. The criminal statute of limitations is, I think, was raised until like age 36. The civil is age 50 some odd. And so that makes a big difference. And so I think you need this type of litigation to basically provide one more layer of accountability and deterrent for actions that can't meet a criminal standard, right? Because you have a very high standard of proof that is necessary and of behavior for to criminally charge someone or to criminally convict someone. And there's many occasions where prosecutors don't bring things against people because they can't prove it beyond a reasonable shadow of doubt. But there's also things that happen where we can prove that it happened. Just, it's hard to do it without doubt. But that's what you want as a standard for criminal trials. But you may not want that for other things. And that's the value of having this type of litigation in society. Bronze Plan. If it weren't for you guys, I'd probably be a Sam Harris, Bill Maher supporter, just like the rest of my family. So I want to thank you for that. Love you all. 4 more. Disco Stew. Disturbing to see all this is getting dangerous takes about GOP rhetoric around Ilhan Omar. Getting dangerous. We've already forgotten the guy attempted to assassinate numerous Dems 6 months ago, or the Coast Guard guy with the hit list. Maybe it's time for the mainstream media to accept this is what conservatives want. DX Fool. Hello, cis people. That drug was Risperdal, right, which I took over 20 years as a young adult for my OCD, one of many that failed to control my symptoms. I suppose if young transgender girls took Risperdal, they would have been happy with the side effects. Speaking of trans people, today's the day trans members of the military have to declare their gender. Some of them who couldn't get a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria in time will either have to stay closeted and suffer in silence or resign from the military. At least Chelsea Manning, who's still behind bars, but Edward Snowden is not, beat the Trump deadline. Peaches. Ram Saint, next time someone argues with you that capitalism only creates the best services and industries, enlighten them to the existence of a totally real business called Garfield Eats. It's apparently an Uber Eats clone with their own delivery system in restaurants, but the only food they sell is lasagna and Garfield-shaped pizza. Glorious capitalism. And
hey, that's hilarious. I support that.
The final I am of the day. In case you missed it, there is no new scientific evidence that glyphosate is carcinogenic, only social pressure to consider it. So I would disagree, but I don't want to get into that.
Nerd.
See you. Bye. Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah.